as you just heard, as you know by now, the prompt is an opportunity to generate meaningful structure for tackling the case. And what that means is that there isn't one way to go about it, as Ben said. Every case is going to be slightly different, and we encourage you to tailor that answer based on the question and the conversation you want to have about it with the interviewer. So this is the start of our live demo here. So I'm the interviewer, Ben is the interviewee. I'm a tough interviewer, so I apologize ahead of time. Ben, are you ready?
Yeah, I braced myself to the greatest extent possible. Let's do it.
All right, great. So what you're about to hear is exactly how it will sound on interview day. How do you think about whether Los Angeles should host the Olympics? More specifically, what are the potential benefits and costs of doing so?
Gotcha. Is that all the information we have here? Is there additional context?
Yeah, that's what we've got. Yeah.
Awesome. Do you mind if I ask like a quick couple clarifying questions?
Absolutely, go for it.
Awesome. So first off, like time frame, is this 20 years from now? Is this a couple years from now? Just want to get an idea of what the courses that we have to assemble the resources we'll need.
Yeah, so let's say it's 8 years from now.
8 years from now. Okay, so
yep.
Got it. You mind if I take like 45, 60 seconds to just come up with an initial structure?
You got it.
All right. Jeremy and I are used to this, but thinking during silence is definitely a core component of casing, as strange as it is.
Yeah. Also, feel free to play along and think about how you would approach this as well.
Okay. So I think this is a pretty high level question. But ultimately, if our client is a city or a mayor's office of some kind, I really would want to look at this in some respects as an investment, but it's definitely more than just that, considering a whole range of factors. So I think the first thing I would want to think about is just how much we can potentially generate as a city from this. And I'll start with potentially some of the harder figures and move to some maybe softer elements, some things that are a little bit less quantifiable. So the first thing I'm thinking about is when you think about an Olympic Games, like there are tons and tons of venues, tons and tons of events that are being held. So how much could you actually generate revenue-wise as a city? You probably charge certain sets of certain tickets for certain types of events. Potentially one like event pass that covers an individual's ability to attend the Olympics full in one fell swoop. I would want to understand those direct sales that we could actually generate. I also, from a little bit of experience I have thinking about putting a stadium together in a city, there's a lot of auxiliary sources of revenue as well, in addition to just direct ticket sales. I'd want to think about like how much additional upswing we might get in restaurants in the area, potentially rights we could sell through advertising or TV, potentially streaming. Hotel revenue also strikes me. A boost in tourism also strikes me as another way we could make money as a city through the Olympics, and potentially even like additional taxes from rising property values in a city with such high profile. So those are all the direct potential revenue sources I would think about in terms of like the upside of something like this. In terms of other things I might think about from a positive standpoint that are maybe more qualified or qualitative in nature rather. I think this provides like a world stage for a given city. And so this could, if done well, and we could talk about what might happen if it's done poorly. We could talk about how I think a city that's put on the world stage is successful. More people want to move there. More people want to invest in that city potentially long term. It's simply exciting. Everything from athletes wanting to play there in general, all the way to people just wanting to move there. Just a lot of potential brand image related stuff that I think I'd want to consider, and just general prestige. On the cost side, I think this is where it gets very complicated. But I also think we could probably separate this into a few categories. One that I think is massive is infrastructure. I really don't know exactly what it would take for the city of Los Angeles, just because I don't know the entire city inside and out, to actually allow for such a boost in traffic, literal foot traffic, and also cars on the road, et cetera. So potentially, would we need to actually like add, like again, we may need to add a venue or two, like an actual stadium or piece of real estate. We also may need to add potential infrastructure in terms of like something very, very large scale, like highway lanes. I also think in terms of actual cost, we'll need to think about like security for an area like this.
Mm-hmm.
If we are having millions and millions of people coming into our, into our city, like how are we actually going to make sure that they stay safe? And frankly, like safe from external threats, quite literally something as extreme as terrorism, but also safe from one another in terms of congestion, added traffic to the roads, et cetera. And that brings me, I think, to some of the outside of infrastructure, some other, I don't want to say that they aren't quantifiable, but certainly considerations for, call it like the internal capabilities or the capabilities in general of the city. Can we actually, like, is it realistic for a city like Los Angeles, where there's already a huge traffic problem that's that is well known to locals? Is it realistic even that the city can actually host millions and millions of more people? Could it even host an Olympic Games with its own citizens in a reasonable way? So that's probably my biggest additional consideration in terms of the cost or the risk side. And naturally, there is the downside in terms of brand, where if this doesn't go well, or if this is kind of a cluster in many respects, you really can cause a lot of problems for the city, and all of the positives I mentioned on that side could turn to negatives. So those would be the main factors I'd want to think through here. If I could start in one place, I'd probably either want to start with understanding what the infrastructural investment needed would be, or start to understand some of the more direct like revenue sources that we talked about earlier.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Let's pause there, do some quick feedback, and then we'll move forward. So you want to self-assess yourself first, or you want my feedback first?
Yeah. So I think in general, I'm wondering if my buckets felt a little broad. Like if I could have maybe like direct revenue in terms of benefits, direct revenue, and then other kind of basically was my buckets. And then on the cost side, it was like infrastructure and then potentially like security and traffic were the main bucket areas I thought about. I kind of overlaid it with some like brand risks and stuff like that, but I felt like my answer was a little long, or very long. So I think it was definitely long. So I think
It was.
Yeah, and I think part of this is me really trying to think about this in 45 to 60 seconds. Maybe on the real case, if I had something so open-ended and so layered, I probably would take a little bit more time setting up my framework. I've noticed myself when I don't take that like extra 15 seconds setting something up, I end up taking an extra 30 seconds explaining it afterwards because I'm thinking on the fly. So those are some thoughts there. I think I was probably collectively exhaustive, or pretty exhaustive, but less meaty, or less not overlapping. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. It was too long, and I'm happy to give. So for everyone in the audience, Ben and I obviously both found success in the process and trained together, but we have very different styles of delivering answers. Ben's answers are a little bit more drawn out. They're awesome in that way. My answers are super concise. I think it might be useful for me to give my like 1 minute answer here and to show people, but
Yeah,
that's the main feedback I had from a like what could have been done better standpoint. The best part about what Ben did is that he just answered the question. We have seen so many people come into these interviews, especially with a question like this, that literally says, what are the potential benefits and costs of doing so? And be like, well, I want to understand like the market and the barriers to entry. And I'm like, that is not the question. The question was, what are the upsides and what are the downsides? And Ben answered that right on point.
Yeah, and so also as Jeremy, as somebody who's trying to like give myself positive feedback once a year, I think the one thing that I tried to do intentionally to that point is every single thing I included, I didn't just like leave it out there. I didn't just say, let's look at the ticket sales. Like, why? And so every single answer, I think part of why I'm long-winded is that I'm giving you the rationale behind everything I'm including. I don't want you to feel like something's random or just unnecessarily put in there. So I think that's part of what's driving me to speak more. But keep going, Jeremy. I actually kind of want to hear your 1 minute, because I always try, like, I've seen this case before, sure, or something related to it. But like I try not to like memorize anything or try not to go into this with too much like context, because otherwise it doesn't come across as genuine. So
Yeah, no, sure. Here we go. So in considering whether LA should host the Olympics, I think there are lots of upsides and lots of downsides that need to be considered. I'm going to start with the upsides. So obviously the big upside for the city is that they're going to sell tickets to the venue. They're going to sell, people are going to be coming in from out of town. They're going to be buying tickets to go to the games. So I want to understand how big of an upside that's going to be. Then there are just all these auxiliary and adjacent upsides that are going to happen either as a secondary result or just like a consequence of people being in the city. Things of that nature are going to be, hotels are going to be booming. The economy is going to be stimulated from all of the food being bought, the souvenirs, people going out and doing things in the city, and all the venues that normally just tourists go to. Now you've got like millions of people from other cities. And I think some of these benefits could spill over into the longer term also. How could they play into the building of LA being like a global hub for entertainment? So those are the big things I would think about on the upsides. On the downsides, I think there are just dangers here. You've got millions of people in a city, and I don't even know how you test this out before it happened, but there's risk of just over congestion in a city that's already congested. There's the risk that for some reason, hey, LA doesn't hit and we don't sell the tickets that we plan to, and the costs end up being higher than what we bring in. And then in terms of the investment we have to make to actually host this, we need an absolute ton of people. A lot of labor need to be available, so that's a big cost. We have to build venues, which is a giant outlay and a very not timely, but like a long-term project to do unless we're utilizing stadiums and whatnot that exist. Then I think there are also security and terrorist threats as well. So that's just a broad sweep of the upsides and sides I'd want to think about, but I'd want to start with examining what are the upsides we can get from especially selling tickets to our events.
Yeah, and I'm going to check you, Jeremy. That was actually definitely 2 minutes. And so 1 minute, 1 minute answer on this kind of question, I think is rather hard. And I think it's harder. I think it's harder the less context you have, counterintuitively, because we just like, oh, how do you host the Olympics? Like, should a city host the Olympics? Like, someone who's worked in a mayor's office, like that's a crazy question to just be asked. So I think that was still really good though. I think you did a great job of doing like, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the upside. I talk about the upsides. I'm going to remind you I just talked about the upsides, then move to the next thing. I think your transitions were really strong there as well, just to add to that.
Appreciate
so awesome.
That.
Of course.
Cool. So there you saw two different but both solid answers. So let's get into the first point of analysis here. The mayor is particularly interested in ticket sales, as both Ben and I have alluded to in our frameworks. That would be important, as he believes that this item will have the largest revenue impact from hosting the games. As such, she's asked you to provide a high-level estimate of the ticket revenue we can expect from the games. So how would you go about estimating that?
I think there's a bunch of different possible approaches. I might start with thinking about the city of Los Angeles and thinking about how many people are actually there, but I don't want to do that because I still don't know what the level of influx is going to be. I think it might be better to go a little bit more ground up with actually understanding like where these events are going to be hosted and capacity, because if you have a billion people in a country, but your stadium is only 20,000 seats, well, you can only host 20,000 people at a time. So I think I'd probably want to understand probably like how many events we're actually going to have, and then how big the venues are that we have at our disposal. I'm not sure, like when I think about like the Olympics, like some events are like indoors, some of them are outdoors. So like when I think about like the pommel horse and the double bars and stuff like that, that's usually in like a smaller indoor facility. Whereas stuff like the javelin toss is like outside and there's like a giant stadium. And you also have like, thinking about like the intro or like the first night where all the flags are like, everyone runs the flags. Like you at least have one giant stadium you're using for these games. So I think my categories that I'd want to analyze would definitely be the event size and the capacity. And then I think maybe related to our point around congestion earlier, I don't think it's a guarantee that everybody's going to be able to make every event. But it may not matter as much for people who have pre-purchased tickets online, but given that there's going to be a percentage of people that are probably buying tickets at the door, I would imagine that like it's possible that everybody who wants to go may not be able to go. So I do care about like attendance. So those would be my main categories. And I think the one I'm leaving out is just like, if we have like one price for the ticket, like I kind of talked about volume in all those, like the kind of the dimensions of volume, but I think like, are we selling one ticket, multiple tickets? Are we selling like, is a percentage of our sales going to be conducted through like I mentioned earlier, like an event pass, or like you give somebody like, you know, for $5,000, you can go to any event whenever and you can cut the line, or like a fast pass like Disney World, something like that. So those would be my main considerations in terms of estimation. And I'd be curious if we have any data behind that.
Yeah, that sounds great. So we are going to assume that there are, to answer your last question first, just one ticket type, and they're just individual tickets. Like there's no like season pack or like multi-day pack. So each event, and just for simplicity, we're going to assume that each stadium size, and I'm going to give you that breakdown in just a moment, has one ticket price for every seat, even though we know that's, you know, might not be true on game day. Going to just use an average here to figure the revenue out.
Can you say that last point again? I didn't quite.
Yeah. So we're going to assume that we're going to assume one fixed price per ticket in each stadium without any variance between like where the seat is. And
got it. So like an average ticket price per stadium. Exactly. Okay, but there's multiple stadium types, and so the price will change across. Okay, cool.
Yes. Cool. So another thing to address another one of your points, there are 100 events total. And I know you mentioned venue sizes. We have 4 different venue sizes that we're going to be hosting games in. So those sizes are small, medium, large, and extra large venues. So what information would be helpful for you to get started on your estimate?
Yeah, like I think what we were just talking about. So like how big is, when you say like, you know, how many fries am I getting in the supersize? Like I kind of want to know how many seats are in each of these venues. And then those prices that you mentioned earlier for the 4 different stadium types or event venues. And then you just mentioned there's 100 events. So are we hosting, do you mean 100 events per stadium, or do you mean 100 events like in total split across those 4 venue types?
Total 100 ticketed events.
100 ticketed total events. Okay. So I'd want to know what that breakdown is across small, medium, large, extra large. And then I don't know if we covered this, but if there's any figure on like attendance or something where it's like, I don't know what percentage of people we project based on the sales that we have, or the sales that we plan to sell online versus in person, like what percent maybe seats go unfilled.
Yep. Like, will we fill up? Cool. So let me just dump you the information now. So for the small stadium, the capacity is 500. For the medium, it's 1,000. For the large, it's 10,000. And for the extra large, it's 50,000. In terms of price of the tickets, in the small stadium, it's $25 per ticket. In the medium, it's 50. The large, it's 100. And the extra large, it's 250.
$250 in the extra large bucket?
Yep.
Okay. It just sounds to me like that bucket is overwhelmingly.
It is. The figures there are high. And then in terms of the breakdown of the events, 20 events happen in the small venue, 30 events happen in the medium, 30 happen in the large, and 20 events happen in the extra large venue.
You said, sorry, 20, 20, 30, or 20, 30, 30, 20.
Yeah, 20, 30, 30, 20.
Okay, got it.
And then for the percent of seats that are filled, it's in the small venue, we can expect to sell 50% of the seats. In the medium,
50%, sorry, 50%, sorry to cut you off, 50% of the seats on average per event.
Yeah.
In that venue.
Yes.
Okay.
Over the course of the games.
Okay.
For medium, that figures 75%. And then for large and extra large, it's 90% for both of those.
Okay. 50, 75, 90, 90. Do I have that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay. So before I even calculate, I think my first hunch is I'm going to start with the extra large bucket. I can't do all this math instantaneously, but I would say that that's probably going to be the lion's share of the revenue, just because it's by far the largest and by far the highest priced. And there's there's good utilization, and there's a smaller number of events, but like it's going to trivialize, I think, at least the small and medium sized buckets.
Cool.
So in terms of calculating this, I think there's a couple. I'll just go down if it makes sense. I'll just start with the extra large bucket, calculate the total revenue. Same with the large, same with the medium, same with the small. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, great. So in terms of multiplying out here, the capacity here is 50,000 per event. We have 20 events, so that is that's just a million, a million, let's just say, units. And if you multiply that by $250 per ticket, that's $250 million. You mentioned the utilization was 90%. 10% of 250 million is 25 million. So less that out, and you have 225 million for the extra large bucket. That's a strong number. So moving to the large, I'll do the exact same thing. The capacity is 10,000 per event. There's 30 events, so that leaves us with 300,000 units, so to speak. Multiply that by $100, that gives you $30 million at 90% utilization. Less out 10% of 30 million, that's 3 million. 30 minus 3 will give you 27 million. So I'm already feeling like the number is going to end up close to around a quarter billion dollars, just because these other two buckets are rather small.
Given what you have, let's pause here. Given what you have so far, roughly what fraction of the large bucket will the medium bucket be, roughly?
What fraction?
Yeah, looking at the numbers you have, like
it's like a 25th or a 30th.
Yeah, exactly. So do you feel like it's super relevant for this?
It's not super relevant, because that would leave us at like 1 to 2 million. So cool. It's not going to make or break anything.
Perfect. Yeah. So just for simplicity, I would say you can leave that one out. Those two smaller buckets out. Okay.
So that puts us at exactly 252 million. To call it around $250 million. My first thought on that is I kind of actually expected that number to be a little higher. And I don't know what that expectation is necessarily tied to, but for the pretty substantial investment, I mean, this will take at least a year, if not 2 years of planning, potentially tons of infrastructural investment. $250 million is $250 million. I mean, that is significant for a city, but knowing some mid-sized city budgets are well over $1 billion in terms of total revenue and that they can allocate in a given year. That doesn't strike me as like so amazing that I'm gung-ho about hosting the Olympics. It's not small either. So I would say in general, I want to use a term like I'm disappointed with $250 million, but this has me leaning a little, making me a little bit hesitant, considering the massive infrastructural costs. We still need to assess those types of things. But this number strikes me as a little small.
Yeah, awesome. I like that you put that into context. The other thing I would just add as like an interviewer right now is there are the other revenue buckets. So 250 million just fits into the picture of like, it's probably the biggest one, but it's not all of it. But I agree, your assessment is spot on. So let's chat about the solution here. Like, I'm sure I saw a bunch of you writing along here, so I appreciate you all doing the math alongside Ben. But this is pretty standard, as in the question was posed. It's clearly an analytical question. Ben needed some information from the interviewer, so he laid out how he was thinking about it, and then just asked for what he might need to solve it. And then I was able to give him what he needs. Sometimes he'll go down like a wrong path, just pull back up, try something new, get back on your feet. You might not always get it on the first try in terms of like what you're fishing for, but that was pretty well done. Anything you want to add, Ben?
Yeah, I think the consultants, or people, partners especially, like they will appreciate you qualifying the quantitative and quantifying the qualitative. So if you have a bunch of like foo-foo information, that's like, oh, like let's talk about brand marketing. I mean, that's great. That's awesome. But marketing now has become this SEO optimized business for a reason. We need to actually put metrics to the things that, like, something high level like design, et cetera, can't quite get to the granularity of. Similarly here, in the inverse case here, you have like very hard numbers, but like, okay, if I just like walk into like a client's office or like, city mayor and be like, $250 million. It's like, okay, like the mayor's gonna be like, well, and what do I do with this? Is that good? Like, what do we think? How does that compare to other, like other similar things? Like, what is this like? Will this actually justify all the costs we're going to put into this? Like, you need to be able to contextualize the numbers. I also think like in real time, kind of looking at the buckets that you have and the numbers that you're putting down as you're calculating and being like, like, I don't really like the small bucket's really not going to drive anything here, right? So giving that information to your interviewer gives like kind of like that felt common sense, and doing that for your interviewer as opposed to them having to prompt you, I think goes a long way.
Yep, totally. Cool. Let's move forward. So from quantitative analysis to qualitative analysis we go. So cities often have different levels of success hosting the Olympics. When comparing Beijing, which was in 2008, and London, which was 2012, post-Olympic Games, Beijing did not really see the economic bump they'd expected and seemed to struggle, whereas London had the opposite experience. What do you think these two cities, or why do you think these two cities had different experiences? And do you think LA would be more similar to Beijing or London in their post-Olympic outcome and the experience as a whole?
Is there any information I can ask for here? I think this is an interesting question in the sense that my first hunch, and I want to like significantly qualify what I'm saying here, because I've actually lived for several months in London coincidentally, but I've never been to Beijing. So I think if I were to make any sort of assessments here, I would take my own assessments with a grain of salt, and I would be intensely Googling everything. So I think part of this is, I mean, I know London is a huge, like, as they call it, football culture there. I think they have tons of stadiums. They already have infrastructure. Having been there, there's a huge culture of sport in the UK and in London in general. The city of LA also has tons of sports teams. There is the California area. I think the state of California has more sports teams than like an entire, like, multiple states combined. So I think that one point of comparison is definitely the sporting culture and related probably to the positive experience of London is that they've seen this movie before. I can't speak exactly to why Beijing had such a negative experience, but potentially it could be due to, in part at least, the lack of this same level of sophistication in terms of like the actual infrastructure that they literally have in the ground, but also the actual familiarity with running events of this type. So those are two factors I think of at first. Another is I mean, London is one of the financial capitals of the world. They have tons of resources at their disposal, and they are at this point in time, we're a more developed economy in the sense of they have a lot more financial instruments at their disposal. They can more easily move capital around. They could generate needed investments potentially more easily. Again, these are assumptions, but that might be another factor here. I don't know if this is the case, but and this may be a stretch, but like, we talked a little bit about culture, but like maybe there's just a lot more people that are interested in Olympic Games. There's also massive economic inequality in Beijing and in China. Like, this may be part of what's driving the actual issues here of people being able to actually attend these venues and go to these events and even have interest in these things beyond like actual real life considerations that they're wrestling with. So if you have a bunch of people with a lot more disposable income who are already more familiar with these cultures going to events, whose operators are more familiar with running them and have the infrastructure in place, all of those factors to me make me feel that LA might be a little bit, congestion aside, which feels a little similar to more to Beijing, it feels a little bit more like a parallel to London to me.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And so since it's more of a parallel to London, I guess that the next thing following from that is that we might see it have more positive, like a positive impact in the post games.
Yes. Time. Knowing the like from like the incredible amount of traffic, in a place like Beijing, that aside, the conversation around, or the comparative point to London, and I think this is a natural exercise we would probably want to run in looking at multiple cities and best practices. And if we were the city of LA, thinking through like, how do we actually do this, or what would we need to believe for us to think that we could actually run a game or a set of games like this? looking at cities like London and would provide, I think, a little bit more hope. And so I think after thinking through this a little bit with you, I think I'm a little bit more optimistic about our potential for hosting.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate though you knowing that it's, or acknowledging that it's not a perfect fit, and that beyond these two other cities, before making this gargantuan decision to host the games, could also just look at like other cities and do like case study type stuff about like, hey, what actually leads to the success of this, and what are the variables that might have led Beijing to be less of a boom after and London to be, you know, a significant boom after.
Mhm.
Cool. I appreciate your answer there. I thought that it was that's really my feedback, is that it was well done. My general feedback to you generally is that it can be tighter, probably, and maybe a hair more organized, as in I usually advise people that I'm coaching to, with these qualitative answers, try to add some structure where there really isn't any. And I think this was to your point before, which is like add some quantitative to the qualitative. For me, that comes across as like, you know, say something to the effect of like, there are three things that I think make LA more similar to London. One is the infrastructure, two is the fan base, and three is like the whatnot.
No, that's a great point. And I think at the very least, so I don't know if for the folks out there that their brains are a little bit more snowbally in nature, like I think of ideas as I'm thinking of ideas. So I don't necessarily like wake up in the morning and I'm like, I know the 4 things I'm going to do today. Like that's not how I operate. I'm like, I'm going to do this one thing. That went well. Okay, let me try something else. That didn't go so well. Let me try a third thing. And so at the very least, if your brain works a little bit like that, do what Jeremy just did, but do it at the end to at least fake the structure, or at least not fake it, but like remind the person, like wrap the present in something. Don't just like carry 4 items out of your house, like put them in a bag, you know? So I think I would say something like, so those would be the 3 or 4 things, X, Y, Z, that I would want to consider when I'm comparing these cities, and why I think it's probably a better tie into LA. Blah. So you're dead on.
Yeah,
okay.
that's perfect. I just gave it up front. You can give it at the end too. It just puts a wrapper on it. All right, let's wrap this up. So given all the info that you've been presented, that you figured out, should LA host the 2028 Olympic Games?
Overall, everything we've considered, I think LA should strongly consider hosting the Olympic Games. My biggest points are that looking at comparative cities like London, I think that there's a lot of reason for optimism from a qualitative perspective. I also think, secondly, it is a little hard to deny the hard financial metrics. And the more that I think about $250 million, even if that's a 20-25% revenue bump to the city's budget, it's still $250 million. And that I think is a rather reasonable motivator. My major hesitations we've highlighted already, but worth re-emphasizing, and risks I definitely want to consider. Infrastructural investment. If we feel like we have to build an entire new stadium for some reason to make this happen, or we feel like we have to add 3 lanes to the 405, those could be reasons to put this on hold, or at least potentially withdraw our name and consider future years or future bids. So other than the major congestion of potential infrastructural investment, I think this could be something pretty powerful for the city of LA.
Awesome. What do you feel like you would do or advise the like mayor in the office to do next to like nail down if it is?
Yeah. In terms of next steps, I would absolutely want to get clear understandings, especially from prior cities who have similar profiles. What were the infrastructural investments that were required? What did those numbers look like? Getting clear on the cost side of the financials feels like an essential before we even and a first step, because let's not waste our time with a bunch of cultural or other comparisons if the numbers don't line up. Secondly, I'd really want to look at the further auxiliary sources of income. I don't necessarily have an internal benchmark off the top of my head here on what that might look like. But if it's 20, 30, 40% of our ticket sales, you think about the boost to hotels being the most appealing. I'd want to understand what the volume of that boost would be, and how much money we think we could project to make, again, based on other city comparables, and kind of indexing by our own population and expected haul here. So those would be the immediate next steps for me.
Cool, great. Appreciate the recommendation, sir.
More concise. I just took my time and said less words.
It was concise.
Look at that. Look at this, guys. See, we're learning.
Self-assessment for you there. How'd it feel?
Felt good.
recommendation?
Felt good. I just like, as somebody who, again, who's like worked for multiple city governments, I'm kind of like, it's one of those cases where you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit.
Mm,
And I think part of my lack of concision here is also my brain going, what if this, what if that, that could go wrong, that's probably going to go wrong. So I think my experience almost played against me in some respects. And so I think at the end there, I was kind of like, let's just stay focused on what has been presented in the case and not try to bring in like additional information, and stay focused. So that was my kind of like self reflection there.
nice. Yeah, I appreciate you staying focused and not like putting the stuff you already know about these things onto what you actually had here in terms of information. But I also at the same time think if you have some experience in the space, happy for you to bring some of it in and use it as like an anchor or like a comparison point or just something to add, like a new perspective. So you did bring it in a bit, which I appreciated earlier in the case.
Awesome.
Cool. So that's
Yeah,
the case.
Let's do Q&A. Yeah.
Yeah. Q&A time.
I have a question, if I may.
What's up?
So, I really appreciate the way you structure things, and I think I'm glad you said that you have to suspend disbelief, given like your experience, because like, for instance, in your analysis, you were primarily like financial cost focused. So like, we all know that, for example, when SoFi Stadium came to LA, lots of the existing residents were priced out. Is that like ever considered in these analyses?
You can use your, I mean, I don't think we were financial cost focused. Actually, most of the analysis was on revenue. But I think in terms of like bringing your experience, I think that's totally fair. I think you could totally say something like, hey, like, I just happened to have read an article on X. Like, for example, I didn't mention it, but I had a thought that like, like there's a lot of ghost cities in China. Like, and then I actually do know that some of these stadiums are rather empty at this point. And so the after effects of infrastructural investment, like we need to make sure we have permanent use of infrastructure beyond just like, hey, we're hosting the Olympics. Yay, it makes sense in our like 24-month forecast. Like you're gonna have a giant stadium in the ground like forever. And you're using tax dollars to put that in. There's also going to be publicity potentially in terms of pushback on that. Like there's other things to use. Maybe like you want to reform your education system instead of like making a stadium, right? So there's a lot of other considerations. And I think they are valid, but they're the types of things you should use more as caveats and add-ons in your case, throwaway lines almost, less so like starting to like if you go down a rabbit hole based on stuff that's just, it's not off topic necessarily, but it's not the right area to shine the spotlight.
Got it. Thank you.
Great question though.
Cool. Mo, looks like you've got a question. Go for it.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. I think it's a follow-up question, Ben, because Olympic Games are actually the most expensive, probably event. Like, I think Rio de Janeiro costs like 11 billion, and I don't know, Tokyo 15, and even Russia at like 50. So do you think it's a good practice if you maybe would give what I call expectations to your interviewer about the things that you would like to focus on, giving the complexity of evaluating something like this north of billions upon billions of dollars? I mean, as Ben was saying, you don't want to go in a rabbit hole. So, but
can I ask what your exact question is?
11,
what is the exact question here? Should we evaluate things if they're big numbers?
Yes,
you should, because you should, because you're going to be working with Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies, major cities and institutions. And like the reason they're hiring you is, and look, there's all sorts of reasons to debate whether these institutions should necessarily be hiring consultants for certain things, but they are. And the reason that you need to get familiar with doing them in a case is because you have to do them on the job. So the answer to that question is absolutely yes. You have to do your best. You have limited information. Navigating ambiguity and not having all the information is simply what this is. It's not. If we had hours and hours, I'm sure you could come up with the best answer possible. But I had 60 seconds, so doing our best.
Sure. Thank you, Ben.
We're fielding a lot of questions in the chat, which is awesome. Anyone else want to raise their hand and ask one for the group? We had another.
Yeah, and we can even just like address some of the questions here out loud.
Yeah.
So
sure.
Haraj, I actually love your question. Hard plug for chess, but I think no, definitely don't do chess to get better at business. They're unrelated. The amount of chess players I've met who are horrendous at business is really it's the lion's share of them. So I think business acumen, like read great books, like read great physical books that are related to business. My favorite business book that I've ever read is The Secret Life of Groceries, not because it's directly about business, but because it taught me truly how to think through a supply chain end to end, almost by accident. Absolutely fascinating. Thinking about how food goes from being grown or being literally caught in the wild all the way to ending up on shelves. And it is a real, it's a real inside look at all the goods and bads of that. It's about the founder of Whole Foods too, so it's kind of cool. So I think that's probably a lot closer to it. I also think like mental math exercises, like calculate the tip on the bill, size the market randomly, be a nerd, like find stuff you're interested in. Like how many, like, you know, if the MLB like opened a new stadium, or like if the MLB wanted to expand to Europe, how many people do you think they'd be able to get who are interested in baseball? Why or why not? Right? Like, I don't know, just random questions. Doing things like that I think are helpful. I think Taylor has a question.
Taylor, yep.
Hey, yeah, just on that note, with respect to mental math, there's a point there when you were calculating revenue on the large or extra large stadium, and then you switch to the smaller ones, and then you were asked like to think about that as a fraction of the large one. And I'm wondering like if that is a typical sort of question you'll get thrown in the middle of doing a calculation. Okay.
Definitely.
And then a follow up to that is like, should you think about preempting? Like just as a tactic, should you think about preempting, like think about making that sort of qualitative comparison as you're doing it? Like, look, this is a really small fraction of this giant one we just calculated, sort of thing.
And sometimes like Jeremy, you might go like, yo, like, no, I want the exact number. And then you keep calculating the exact number. Worst case, you lost 4 seconds, but potentially you saved 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, well, I think I just want to add like something small to that. You want to show the interviewer that you're thinking about things beyond just the like, you know, let's just crunch this number. So when you say something like, it looks like this next bucket's going to be like a fraction of the previous bucket, is it even worth doing? You're showing them that you're seeing that you might have the answer already, and you don't need to like go crunch a bunch of numbers that's going to add like 0.001% to your answer. So I think it shows a lot of great qualities when you propose like an easier way or something that, hey, this just doesn't seem important anymore.
Right, because not just about raw horsepower, it's about doing it the smart way, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, doing and also just letting the interviewer know that you're thinking beyond just the like number that's on the page. Getting some good questions in the chat. You've got Oscar, as interviewers, what are the qualities that you immediately want to identify in a candidate to see if he or she is a good fit? I would say the number one quality that I am looking for is proactivity. Ben, how about you?
Yeah, you're always looking for the next steps. I care a lot about the style in which you communicate. And I don't just mean structure. I mean, are you being open-minded? Are you being thoughtful? Are you creating a dialogue? Are you approaching this like you're delivering some kind of sermon to me with your brilliant answers that you come up with in 11 seconds? Or are you actually interested in learning a little bit and being open-minded? And some of the feedback I got, which is related to some of what you're seeing here and what Jeremy is pointing to, is like, what I do well is I overwhelm you with hopefully decent ideas. Like I will give you 74 ideas. The task for me is to have more storm than more brain than storm in the brainstorming process. I think when I have somebody who's kind of like robotically going through a case, I just think to myself, like, this person, if I put them in front of a client, like if I put them in front of somebody and I wanted them to represent me and my company, like that would just be tough. I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if they could sit in a meeting alone with a CEO or with a whatever. So I think that's something I'm looking for. Communication style is big.
Cool. Any tips on note taking within 60 seconds while coming up with the framework? Yes.
My framework was so simple, dude. I like what I just did, man. Like it was a great question. Absolutely another one of those things that comes with reps. You get better and better at an almost exponential pace at some. It's like an S curve in terms of how much you improve. On cases like 15 to 30 or so. I think less is more. Numbers, get them down. And when you are writing, like I would say, as you get better, be cognizant of not just what you are writing, but where you are writing it on the page. Because your brain, when it's looking back at that piece of paper, will only have a few moments to actually organize itself. And if you've already done some pre-organization, that's great. Like if I showed you my piece of paper, like it just now, like based on the exhibit, like it looks pretty similar. And so I think like it's just like use boxes, use matrices, use simple ways of organizing information when you're writing it down, in addition to making sure you get the right notes. Verbatim is bad.
Yeah, not writing word for word, shorthand, abbreviations, like just picking out what's important. Cool. We've got another minute if anyone's got anything. See other stuff in the chat. Any tips on how to improve communication styles? That's an interesting one.
I think there's definitely the classic, like, so from a structural perspective, it's tell me what you're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about X. Talk about it. Give me the buckets. Give me the things you organized or you've organized, you're thinking about. And then thirdly, remind me. So I wanted to look at X, Y, Z because I think these are really important factors for answering A, B, C. Awesome. So I think that's important. I also think like watch good speakers. Remind yourself that your interviewer 1000% knows this case 10 billion% more than you do. And so approach this thing with a little bit of humility and try to stay thoughtful and patient. There's a lot to communication style, but real confidence, not like false confidence that we can all snuff out. Real confidence comes with practice. And so the best thing you can do to improve your communication style is actually practicing and getting feedback from people. Like as they look at you and you're like, hey, like you kind of said that a little arrogantly, or like the way you spoke was so definitive in nature. It wasn't hedged ever. You just kind of like told me that this is definitely a fact and it's not. Yeah, Michelle, that's a really good, painful way to do it. Watching yourself on film is like, yeah, that's actually a great tip as well. Like totally agree.
Awesome. So we will wrap up there. Both of us would love to hear from you if you're going through case prep, if you want our perspective on anything, you know where to find us. But this was a blast and we appreciate the amazing engagement from all of you guys out there.
Yeah, totally. Thank you guys so much. Those are our QRs for our profiles. You can find us on Leland. Highly recommend Leland and all that they offer. So awesome for you guys to come and hope to see you in future sessions too.
Yeah. Take care, everyone.